Martin's office revved with tension. "Vance, we know you have been job hunting. Your incentive is docked per policy." That line dropped in the middle of the all-hands meeting like a bomb in a quiet library. 1 second, we were looking at slide decks about Q3 wins. The next, Julian Thorne Jr., the chief executive officer's son and our new head of human resources, was reading my name off a list like I had just been court-martialed. My video was off, thank God. All anyone could see was a little circle with my initials, sitting quietly in the corner while my 21-year reputation got run over by a guy who once used vibes as a hiring metric. I am Henry Vance, 54 years old. I have been running compliance at this company since we had 75 employees working out of a converted warehouse. Before that, I spent 11 years in the Air Force doing logistics and financial oversight. I know how to track money and I know how to follow orders. What I do not know is how to stomach incompetence dressed up as innovation. I did not speak, did not flinch. I just clicked my pen 3 times and wrote down the timestamp in my notebook, right between my operational notes and a grocery list. Now, before we go any further, quick favor. If you are listening and have not hit that subscribe button yet, go ahead and do that. Toss a like too. It helps the team keep digging these stories out of the corporate graveyard. All right, back to what I like to call the day my career got ambushed. So there I was, 21 years deep into this company. I had started when we were still operating out of that warehouse with a copy machine that jammed every 3rd page. Back then, nobody knew what compliance meant. It was just me, 3-ring binders, and military-grade organization skills. I wrote half the infrastructure these people were standing on now. Risk management protocols, vendor integrity agreements, financial oversight procedures. And what do I get for it? A public execution over networking activity. The irony. I had not touched my profile since 2017, not even a new profile picture. But apparently, viewing someone else's profile counts as job hunting. Now, because Julian Jr. needed to flex his authority before his next craft beer break. After the meeting, my inbox lit up like a Christmas tree. A couple of junior analysts, poor kids, sent messages with their hands probably shaking. "Sorry you had to go through that, Henry. We support you." I did not know they were going to call you out like that. I did not reply to any of them, not because I did not appreciate it, but because I was already working on something more important, phase 1 of what the military calls reconnaissance. I pulled up the compliance drive and started scanning for my old files. Some were missing. Others had been renamed or moved, probably to make room for Julian Jr.'s efficiency overhaul. That is what he called it in his memo, written in Comic Sans font. I am not kidding. I took a screenshot of that too. The next morning, my access to the performance dashboard was gone, just vanished. No email, no heads up. One day, I am tracking vendor billing metrics. The next, I get a 403 error and a shrug from the technology department. When I asked about it, they said, "Per new structure, your role is no longer authorized. Same department I built from scratch, same dashboards I created with my own hands." Here is the thing about being in compliance for over 2 decades, you do not panic. You document everything. So I started keeping 2 sets of notes, one on my work machine, clean and professional, the other in a notebook at home, which now lived on its own shelf in my closet labeled Operational Intelligence. I was not angry yet. I was something much more dangerous, calm, calculating, because when someone tries to burn you with a match you gave them, the least you can do is make sure they are standing in gasoline. The first real crack showed up that Thursday during a budget meeting. Julian Jr. was grinning like he just invented money. He introduced what he called new resource reallocation structures, corporate speak for gutting my compliance team and moving the headcount to high-growth operations. Translation, his college buddy's consulting business. The chief financial officer, Oliver Stanton, looked skeptical but did not argue. Not yet. And me, I just nodded and took notes. 16 people used to report to me. By Friday it was 5. By the following Monday it was 1, and she was a temp. But here's the funny thing. Every time they deleted one of my protocols, they screwed it up. They left digital breadcrumbs everywhere. Broken links, mismatched policy versions, edits with no audit trail. It was like watching teenagers try to forge their report cards while the teacher watched through the window. So, I started saving everything. email headers, chat threads, meeting invites where I got removed but still received the notifications. I even kept the updated organization chart where my box was grayed out like I died in action. At night after work, I would sit in my kitchen with a glass of bourbon and reread Section 4.3.2 of the Ethics Manual. The one I wrote 10 years ago. The one about retaliation, performance metrics, and what happens to executive bonuses when policies get violated in bad faith. Turns out, sometimes the most dangerous person in a company is not the loudest guy in the room. It is the one who remembers exactly where all the bodies are buried. They did not fire me outright. That would have required backbone. No, they came at me like rust eating through metal. Slow, persistent, relentless. By Wednesday, my team's budget got temporarily frozen for restructuring. By Friday, 3 of my junior analysts were moved to what they called agile pods under a manager whose biggest achievement was a social media post about synergy that got 65 likes. My shared drive access started getting spotty. I would click on a folder I built from nothing and get a 404 error. Try to open a policy document I wrote myself and hit permission denied. When I asked the technology department about it, they blamed cloud migration issues. Funny how the cloud only seemed to have problems with my files. On Monday, I got a calendar invite for something called a compliance alignments session. Sent by Chloe Ramirez, a junior human resources coordinator who put smiley face emojis in her work emails. 2 days later, I saw screenshots floating around our internal messaging application. My metrics, my data, my reports being presented by someone else in a meeting I never knew existed. Julian Jr., that walking networking post in an off-the-rack suit, had labeled me as legacy oversight in the slides. Like I was an old printer they had not gotten around to unplugging yet. Then came the message that really stung. Short and simple from Olivia Harper, one of the few people I actually trusted in that place. I am really sorry about everything. They made me sign something that says I cannot discuss it. Olivia was the analyst I had stayed late to train. Now she was sending me coded apologies from behind a non-disclosure agreement. But that message shifted something in my head. Not anger exactly, more like target acquisition. I opened a new folder on my home computer, called it Project Documentation. Inside, I made separate files for everything: chat conversations, email threads, policy changes, meeting notes, and one special folder labeled simply 4.3.2. From that point on, every time they forgot to include me in an email, I documented it. Every time they published a revised policy without proper version control, I saved both copies and ran a comparison. Calendar changes, access revisions, deleted documents with my name in the metadata. I tracked it all like a supply chain audit. They thought they were making me disappear. I was building their paper trail. Like any good compliance officer knows, violations only matter if you can prove they happened. I started cataloging the obvious stuff first. Julian Jr.'s assistant regularly shared confidential human resources summaries in public chat channels. Basic data protection violations that would make any privacy lawyer rich. Then there was the procurement process that started using my exact language but skipped every approval checkpoint I had built into the system. I even documented expense reports. Julian Jr. had started taking his team meetings at an upscale coffee shop downtown. Company credit card, naturally. What began as $35 coffee runs turned into $550 tabs labeled Team Development Initiatives. Someone in accounting actually uploaded the itemized receipts to our shared finance channel. I saved those files faster than you could say tax audit, but then I stumbled onto something bigger. Much bigger. While reviewing vendor payment logs, something I technically was not supposed to access anymore, I found an invoice that made me stop cold. A consulting firm called Strategic Dynamics Limited Liability Company had billed us $26,500 for quarterly operational assessment. The company address was a shared workspace in Tampa. The contact signature belonged to someone named Nolan Fisher. The approval had gone through Julian Jr.'s new fast-track system, completely bypassing the vendor verification process I had spent 3 years building. My Air Force training kicked in. This felt like fraud. I dug deeper into our payment system and found 2 more invoices from Strategic Dynamics. One for emergency culture assessment in March, Another for leadership optimization consulting in June, same vague deliverables, same rubber stamp approvals, same ghost company. Total damage, $73,800. Here is where it got interesting. I cross-referenced the payment dates with Julian Jr.'s social media activity. Pure coincidence, I am sure, but he had posted vacation photos from expensive resorts within a week of each payment going out. Cabo in March, Aspen in June, Miami Beach in September. Pretty lavish trips for someone pulling down a human resources director's salary. I ran strategic dynamics through the state business registry database. The limited liability company had been registered exactly 4 months after Julian Jr. joined our company. Julian Jr. was not just incompetent. He was running a systematic billing scam using fake vendor contracts. Conservative estimate, around $280,000 over the past 25 months, maybe more if I kept digging. This was not about my bonus anymore. This was about procurement fraud in a company that held government contracts. The kind of thing that gets federal agencies interested in your business practices. Meanwhile, Human Resources continued their campaign to pretend I had never existed. They held town halls about ethical transformation without inviting the guy who literally wrote their ethics policies. One presentation included a slide called Moving Beyond Legacy Frameworks with my department crossed out in red marker. I kept quiet through all of it. Smiled in hallways, nodded during the few meetings I still got invited to attend. Even thanked Julian Jr. when he explained his vision for modernizing antiquated oversight structures. The thing about executives like Julian Jr. is they mistake silence for surrender. They assume that because you are not screaming, you have accepted defeat. What they do not understand is that some of us learned long ago that the most effective weapons are the quiet ones. The coffee cup sat between us like evidence at a crime scene. Julia Benson had insisted we meet at the country club instead of her office. Something about wanting to keep things off the books until we understood the situation. She had been my legal mentor back when I was still figuring out the difference between policy and procedure. Now she ran her own practice, specializing in corporate compliance issues. If anyone could tell me whether I was sitting on dynamite or just firecrackers, it was Julia. "You look like hell," she said, settling into the leather chair across from me. "Thanks." That is exactly what every man wants to hear. I slid the folder across the mahogany table. Plain gray cover, the kind you only keep when you know someone will eventually try to claim it never existed. Julia opened it like she was defusing a bomb. Pages rustled as she worked through the tabs I had organized with military precision: policy violations, procurement irregularities, communication logs, financial discrepancies. Everything labeled, dated, cross-referenced. Her eyebrows went up when she hit the vendor fraud section. Then her jaw tightened as she read through the strategic dynamics documentation. "Henry," she said finally, "how long have you been sitting on this?" "About 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And you are just bringing it to me now?" I shrugged. Wanted to make sure I had my facts straight before I called in reinforcements. She flipped back to section 4.3.2, the policy I had written about bonus retaliation. Read it twice, then looked up at me with something that might have been admiration. "This is airtight," she said. "When they publicly docked your incentive for job hunting without conducting an actual investigation, they triggered your own policy, the one that voids their entire executive compensation pool." That is what I figured. "Henry, do you understand what you are holding here? This is not just a human resources complaint. Between the procurement fraud, the violation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act regarding internal controls, and the clear breach of fiduciary duty by establishing a shell company, you could take down half their leadership team." I sipped my coffee and watched a foursome of retired executives argue about a golf ball on the 18th green. What would you do? Me? I would burn the place to the ground and roast marshmallows over the ashes. She closed the folder carefully. But I am vindictive like that. The question is, what do you want to accomplish? Good question. Part of me wanted revenge for the public humiliation. Part of me just wanted my job back. But the bigger part, the part trained by 11 years of military service, wanted to see justice done properly. I want them to face consequences for what they did, but I want it done right through proper channels. Julia nodded approvingly. Then here is what we do. The quarterly board meeting is next week. The external auditor will be there to review compliance metrics. We make sure he sees your documentation. Just drop it in his lap. Not exactly. Upload everything to the board's shared drive. Flag it as supplemental compliance documentation. He will review it as part of his standard process. I like that approach. Clean, professional, by the book. What happens then? If the auditor does his job, he will present the policy violations to the board during his review. Once that happens, Julian Jr. and his father will have some very uncomfortable questions to answer. We spent another hour going through the documentation, making sure everything was bulletproof. Julia helped me reorganize some of the vendor fraud evidence and suggested adding time spans to the communication logs. Military training is good for a lot of things, but legal documentation requires a different kind of precision. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Not because the fight was over, but because I finally had a battle plan that did not involve just taking punches. The next few days crawled by like a broken watch. I went through the motions at work, attending the meetings I was still invited to, nodding at the right moments, keeping my mouth shut when Julian Jr. announced his latest innovation in compliance management. Tuesday morning brought news that made my blood pressure spike. Chloe Ramirez sent out an email announcing that Olivia Harper had been transitioned to a new opportunity outside the company. Corporate speak for fired. The official reason was budget constraints, but everyone knew the real story. Olivia had been asking too many questions about the missing documentation. I wanted to reach out to her, but any contact would just make things worse for both of us. Instead, I added her termination to my evidence file. Pattern of retaliation, clear as day. Wednesday afternoon, Julian Jr. held what he called an all-hands alignment session. Mandatory attendance for everyone in compliance and risk management, which at this point basically meant me and 2 junior analysts, who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. Julian Jr. stood at the front of the conference room. With a presentation that had more animations than a cartoon, his presentation was titled, Evolving Beyond Traditional Oversight Models. For 45 minutes, he explained how modern companies needed to move past rigid bureaucratic structures and embrace dynamic flexibility. Every few slides, he would use phrases like legacy mindset and change resistance while looking directly at me. I sat in the back row clicking my pen and taking notes. Every word he said was going into my documentation, especially the part where he announced that all remaining compliance functions would be streamlined under centralized leadership. His leadership naturally. When he opened the floor for questions, silence filled the room like fog. The junior analysts stared at their laptops. I raised my hand. Henry, Julian Jr. said, flashing his practice corporate smile. Questions or concerns? Just one, I said. Who is going to handle the quarterly board compliance review next week? His smile flickered just for a second, but I caught it. That is being handled at the executive level now, nothing for you to manage. Copy that, I said, using my old Air Force response. Just wanted to make sure all the documentation was properly organized. Everything is under control, he said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. After the meeting, I went back to my office and uploaded the last piece of evidence to my home computer. Julian Jr.'s presentation slides complete with metadata showing he had copied text directly from policies I had written without attribution. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with the quarterly board packets spread across the table like battle plans. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. The external auditor, a methodical man named Edward Caldwell, would present his compliance review around 11 in the morning. I opened my laptop and navigated to the board's shared drive, found the folder marked Supplemental Documentation, and uploaded my complete evidence package. 63 pages of policy violations, procurement irregularities, internal control failures under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and retaliation documentation, all properly formatted, cross-referenced, and legally sound. The file upload completed at 10:45 at night. I closed the laptop and poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon. In 48 hours, Edward Caldwell would open that folder as part of his standard review process. He would see Policy 4.3.2 and the documentation proving it had been violated. He would review the vendor fraud evidence and the pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers. Julian Jr. had spent weeks systematically dismantling everything I had built. Now he was about to discover that some foundations are deeper than they look. Friday morning arrived like Judgment Day. The boardroom felt different when you knew everyone's secrets were about to spill across a mahogany table. I got there early, claimed a seat in the back corner, where I could watch the whole show unfold. The usual suspects filed in over the next 30 minutes. Board members checking their phones, executives shuffling papers, Julian Jr. adjusting his tie like he was heading to prom. Edward Caldwell, the external auditor, sat at his usual spot with a stack of folders and that methodical expression he wore like armor. The man who had once spent 8 hours tracking down a $62 discrepancy in travel expenses. If anyone was going to read my documentation thoroughly, it was him. The chief executive officer, Julian Sr., called the meeting to order with his standard corporate pleasantries. Budget review, department updates, strategic planning nonsense. I sat through 55 minutes of presentations that could have been emails, waiting for the compliance section. Caldwell finally stood up, adjusted his glasses, and opened his primary folder. Moving to compliance metrics and policy adherence, he announced in that dry, precise voice. Julian Jr. straightened in his chair, probably expecting the usual rubber stamp approval of his modernization efforts. Caldwell flipped through standard review checklist. Information technology security protocols, check. Financial controls, adequate. Personnel policies, mostly compliant. Then he paused, reached for a second folder, and his expression shifted. However, Caldwell said, there are some significant irregularities that require board attention. The room's energy changed like someone had opened a window during a thunderstorm. Caldwell pulled out a single sheet of paper and held it up. Policy 4.3.2 regarding employee compensation adjustments and retaliation protocols. I did not move, did not breathe, just watched Julian Jr.'s face cycle through confusion, recognition, and pure panic in about 3 seconds. This policy, Caldwell continued, was violated during a public all-hands meeting approximately 8 weeks ago. An employee's incentive was eliminated based on alleged job-seeking behavior without conducting the mandatory investigation required under company guidelines. Julian Jr. opened his mouth, but Caldwell was not finished. The policy clearly states that such violations void the entire executive compensation pool for the quarter and trigger immediate internal audit procedures. Silence filled the room like concrete. You could hear the air conditioning humming, papers rustling, someone's pen clicking nervously. The chief executive officer looked at the paper Caldwell had handed him, then at his son, then back at the paper. Who wrote this policy? Caldwell consulted his notes. Henry Vance, Senior Director of Compliance, still listed as active personnel and policy author of record. Every head in the room turned toward me, not with curiosity or surprise, but with the slow, inevitable recognition of people who just realized they had been playing chess with someone who knew all their moves in advance. Additionally, Caldwell said, flipping to another page, there are concerning procurement irregularities involving a vendor called Strategic Dynamics Limited Liability Company. Julian Jr. went white as hospital sheets. Caldwell laid out the vendor fraud with surgical precision. Fake consulting contracts, inflated invoices, payments to a shell company registered to Julian Jr.'s personal address. $73,800 in fraudulent billing over 25 months. Furthermore, Caldwell continued, there is documented retaliation against employees who question these arrangements, including the recent termination of Olivia Harper. The chief financial officer, Oliver Stanton, was now studying Julian Jr. like he was a math problem that did not add up. The board chair was taking notes with the intensity of someone building a legal case. Julian Jr. finally found his voice. This is completely out of context. Henry has been resistant to our modernization efforts from day one. He is clearly trying to undermine Mr. Thorne. Caldwell interrupted. Are you suggesting that your employee fabricated procurement records and board meeting minutes? I am saying he is disgruntled and trying to create a narrative, Julian Jr. stammered. because these documents include timestamps, email metadata, and transaction records from your company's own financial systems, Caldwell finished. Game over. The room knew it. Julian Jr. knew it, and most importantly, his father knew it. The chief executive officer stood up slowly like a man who just aged 10 years in 10 minutes. We will need to recess to discuss these findings. Caldwell nodded. The policy requires a formal response within 45 days. I will be filing a complete report with recommendations. As people filed out of the room, Julian Jr. made one last desperate attempt. He walked over to where I was still sitting. Henry, we can work this out. There is no need to blow this up into something bigger than it needs to be. I looked up at him calmly. Julian, I did not blow anything up. I just documented what happened. But surely we can find some middle ground here. Maybe reinstate your incentive, get your team back together. Son, I said, using my old Air Force tone. The middle ground was following the policies I wrote. You chose a different path. The follow-up meeting happened the next Wednesday. Julian Jr. was conspicuously absent. His father announced that Julian Jr. had decided to pursue other opportunities and that Strategic Dynamics was being investigated for fraud. The board voted unanimously to void the executive compensation pool effective immediately. They also voted to restore my full compliance of authority and budget. Edward Caldwell recommended me for promotion to Chief Risk Officer with a 45% salary increase and expanded oversight responsibilities. But the real victory was not the money or the title. It was sitting in that boardroom, watching a room full of executives realize that competence beats connections every single time. Julian Jr. had spent months trying to erase me from the company's memory. Instead, he had proven exactly why my policies existed in the first place. 4 weeks later, I was back in my office rebuilding the compliance team, with people who understood that rules exist for a reason. Olivia Harper was the first person I called back. The new organization chart has my box right where it belongs. Not grayed out, not minimized, just solid and clear. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a company is not the guy with the biggest office or the loudest voice. It is the one who remembers that policies are not suggestions, they are boundaries. And when someone crosses those boundaries, well, that is when you find out what real consequences look like. Look, if you are over 50 and you have been in the corporate world for any length of time, you know this story. Maybe not the exact details, but the shape of it. Some young hotshot thinks experience does not matter, that institutional knowledge is just dead weight. They push you aside, ignore your warnings, treat your decades of expertise like it is worthless. But here is what I learned from 11 years in the military and 21 years in corporate compliance. Competence is permanent, connections are temporary. And if you have been doing your job right all along, documenting everything and building proper safeguards, then when push comes to shove, the system you built will protect itself. The pen really is mightier than the sword, especially when you are the one who wrote the policies in the first place. I always tell my junior staff that compliance is not just about catching the bad guys. It is about creating an environment where bad behavior becomes mathematically impossible to hide. Julian Jr. thought he could outsmart the system because he had the right last name. But numbers do not care about who your father is, and audit trails do not have family loyalties. In the end, the very modernization he preached was what exposed his ancient brand of greed. We implemented new checks and balances after that day. Every vendor gets double verified, and executive bonuses require an independent review. It is more work, sure, but it is the kind of work that lets everyone sleep soundly at night. Except for those who try to bend the rules, of course. For them, my office door is always open, and my pen is always ready to take notes.